get into some offseason talk, some free agency. We talked about the entire free agent class the other day. Let's focus on the offensive side of the ball right now. And part of our discussion the other day was the receivers at the top. And we saw some of those guys, or a few of those guys, in action this weekend. Chris Godwin, Allen Robinson, and Kenny Golladay. I think there was healthy debate. They're all free agents. Healthy debate as to which one's the best free agent. I think Chris Godwin's going to get franchised. I'm expecting him to be back with the Bucs. Allen Robinson could absolutely hit the market, and for the first time in a long time, or maybe ever, does he go say, I want to play with Aaron Rodgers. I want to play with a great quarterback. I want to put up,
right.
Like if a year from now Allen Robinson leads the league in receptions like Stephon Diggs did, or puts up huge numbers a year from now with a better quarterback, wouldn't be surprised. I'm ready to move Robinson over Godwin too as wide receiver 1 in this class. But Godwin, Robinson, and then Kenny Golladay, I'd say the prizes of this wide receiver class if they all hit the market.
I mean, most of the time, free agents, et cetera, are just going where the money is best, and everything else is a secondary consideration. I think Allen Robinson at this point owes it to himself to have money as a secondary consideration to who the hell is the quarterback that's going to be throwing me the football. Because, we keep talking about this like, man, I feel sorry for Allen Robinson. Look at the guy's list of quarterbacks, even dating back to college. Like, that dude had Christian Hackenberg throwing him the football at Penn State, Blake Bortles, Mitchell Trubisky, Nick Foles. It's been just this never-ending train wreck of quarterbacks. He's literally never had a quarterback that's any good throwing him the ball dating back to at least high school. And he's still incredible. He's still a top 10 receiver with those circumstances. So everybody is always like, come on, just get the guy a quarterback, any kind of viable quarterback. And whenever you put that out into the public domain, into the ether, you get this slew of people that are like, he chose this. Allen did this to himself. He could have gone to Green Bay with the Packers, and instead he chose Chicago. So he, I think, owes it to himself to not do the same thing, right? To not go wherever the hell the money is the highest, and to actually find himself a quarterback as part of this dating program that he's going to be going on in the offseason. Find somebody that's capable of getting you the ball. Don't just take the best offer on the table. And
it's part of the debate here, too. It's Robinson's third contract he'll be going for here. Chris Godwin, his second contract for the Bucs. Golladay, one of the better deep threats in the league. Great body control, contested catch, genius, but just, really a lot of people liked him coming out of Northern Illinois a few years ago, but, man, he is even exceeded probably their expectations. Golladay is interesting, too, because Matthew Stafford's probably the perfect type of quarterback that you would want to put him with, right? That pairing is awesome because Stafford's going to give you opportunities down the field. So I don't know if Golladay is going to find a better option as far as allowing him to make big plays. But, again, he's one of those prizes that you just want to build your receiving core around. And the Lions have a ton of decisions to make now because all of their guys are free agents in that receiving core. I think the second tier of wide receivers are interesting as well, from Will Fuller, who we've always talked about as that quintessential deep threat that opens things up for the rest of the offense.
Do you think that changes based off what we saw this year?
Will Fuller?
Yeah. So Will Fuller was always confusing because the question was always like, what is the difference between a Will Fuller and one of these other deep threat speed receivers that doesn't really do anything? And the reason it was a question is because the splits with Will Fuller on and off the field were insane, right? Even understanding the fact that Nuke Hopkins was your number one weapon and the best receiver, one of the best receivers in the NFL, Will Fuller seemed to be the thing that transformed the Houston Texans offense. When he was on, Deshaun Watson looked great. The offense had insane numbers. And when he was off, it all fell to pieces a little bit. This season, you ship off DeAndre Hopkins to Arizona for a bag of peanuts. And you're like, well, it's okay because Will Fuller's still there. He's the thing that makes this offense actually function. But that didn't happen this year. Will Fuller splits on and off are like the same. They didn't suddenly. It turns out that actually whatever was at work with the Nuke Hopkins, Deshaun Watson dynamic in terms of what that forced him to do from a progression standpoint, from a playing the game methodology, whatever it was significant in terms of determining how Will Fuller approached the game or how he affected the game. And when you take away that and you force Deshaun Watson to play the game more honestly, the Will Fuller impact disappears.
Yeah, I mean, I think Fuller showed a different skill set too, where he could be, more of a slot receiver and spread, move around and do more things. Either way, I don't think it changes the value of what he brings as a field stretcher and a guy that you can create those chunk plays with. And he's a number two. I mean, he's a number two, which is not a knock. It's just you're bringing something to the table where if you have a better complementary piece like a Nuke Hopkins, things could go really well for your offense. So I think Will Fuller will still be coveted out there. The next tier of receivers, though, like Juju Smith-Schuster, definitely a complementary piece. Corey Davis, maybe dropping in the rankings after injuries, but also disappearing down
Hall
the
of
stretch.
Famer.
He's a number two. He's a complementary piece. T.Y. Hilton at this point in his career, a complementary piece. Curtis Samuel, an interesting one as teams get more creative. You've written about receivers lining up at running back and how that stresses defenses. They started to do more of that with Curtis Samuel this year and got the most production out of him in Carolina. Do they try to bring him back? Going to be tough when you already have Robbie Anderson and you have DJ Moore. So for Curtis Samuel, I don't love him as a traditional receiver, but I think you have to have a plan for using him and creating those mismatches. He's an interesting one. And then Marvin Jones for the Lions. All of these receivers are in our top 50 and guys that can make an impact as a number 2/number 3 in the right system.
It's really not a great free agent crop overall. It's really good at the top, and then it falls off quickly. But I think wide receiver is the one position where that's different. There's a lot of really talented wide receivers that are really useful. And even if you go beyond the top 50, you get into some really interesting names. Like Nelson Aguilar for the Raiders this season has been what they drafted Henry Ruggs to be. Like, Ruggs has been absent without leave, and why has he not been a bigger part of this offense? But Aguilar's been the guy that's been catching the deep bombs, that's been making all those big plays. And that honestly was what Aguilar was at USC. He was catching all these deep targets. It's just that when you suddenly put him in press coverage on the outside, he can't really get in a position to make them. But he's been making those big plays. And it's different to the player he was when he had his one good year in Philadelphia as well, where he was in the slot, operating all these horizontal jet motion, all these kinds of things, the quick, shallow cross. So he's a really interesting guy because it's like 1 year of it. So can you trust it?
So,
right. He does. It's like, I don't understand what you do with that. But if you get Aguilar from this year in your offense, it's a difference maker. Like, it's a Will Fuller game changer.
Ranking Aguilar was really difficult for us. We put him at 60 overall on the free agent list. And it's because he's got 5 years in the league, 3 of which were bad.
Yeah.
And then
really
to
bad.
your point, the 2 good seasons that he had looked completely different. A slot receiver and a deep threat, right? And if you knew you were getting this year's Nelson Aguilar, that's probably a top 30 free agent.
It's a top 30 free agent, and it's the first-round pick that he was. Like, it makes sense when you look at his USC tape.
Absolutely. So figuring out, we had to hedge a little bit because you don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
If we just go by what we saw recently, Aguilar is much higher on the list. So he'll be an intriguing one. Sammy Watkins, too, is an intriguing
one
because
going next.
Sammy Watkins, think about the playoffs last year, right? He, whoops Richard Sherman in the Super Bowl, has a huge game in the AFC Championship game, right? Like, Sammy Watkins had 3 touchdowns against Jacksonville, first game of 2019, was it, last year? Just random games where Sammy Watkins just takes over for the Chiefs when Tyreek Hill's not around or Travis Kelce's not around or those guys just aren't, or they're being double covered or whatever.
Yeah. I think he's
inconsistent.
I think he's like a better athlete version of Corey Davis in terms of he's not the reason, he's not responsible for his own production. The same way that running backs are generally a product of their environment and everything else that's going on around them, Sammy Watkins and number 2 receivers are generally a product of what's happening with the number 1 and the other guys, right? So when you decide that you're going to take away Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce and the gravity from those guys pulls the coverage away from somewhere else, Sammy Watkins can go the hell off, right? When he's one-on-one with somebody, he's a great athlete, he's got skills, and he can make some big plays. Same thing is true with Corey Davis. When suddenly you start rotating everything over to A.J. Brown or you start to stuff the box with 9 guys so that Derrick Henry doesn't run for 250, Corey Davis can win one-on-one against a number 2 cornerback. But if you put them out there in a different offense and suddenly there isn't that gravity affecting things and it's just you're on an island against a good player, they're not winning anymore.
One of the debates I'm going to be struggling with this entire year is the idea that, yes, we track WAR, wins above replacement, and when you just look at position against position, receiver is one of the most valuable positions on the field. And I think, again, intuitively it makes sense because when these guys do things well, when receivers perform well, they convert first downs, right? There's like when a defensive lineman does something well, it happens 8 to 10 times a year, and it's a sack and it's a huge play. But when receivers do something well, they convert first downs, which is like 40, 50, 60 times a year. That's significant. That makes a big impact on the team. But how much are you willing to pay a Nelson Aguilar, a Marvin Jones, a Sammy Watkins, complementary receivers versus getting a comparable one in the draft or getting comparable receivers in other places? So the value of a number 2/number 3 receiver, I think, is going to be an interesting discussion. Do they make an impact on the field? Absolutely. But the opportunity cost of that guy versus a draft pick, I think, is going to be a healthy debate all offseason. Quarterback-wise, Dak Prescott, we've mentioned as he's the top free agent until he gets franchised, right? Well, until he gets signed, right, by the Cowboys, right? So Dak's the top guy. Do you see Dak even hitting the market? Will Dallas figure this thing out?
I think they'll figure it out eventually, but it's not easy. Like, I think there's a non-negligible chance that he ends up getting out of there, if for no other reason than Dallas has just built this series of rods for their own back in terms of how they dealt with this contract already. Like, the only thing that's even remotely depressing his contract value and his leverage is the injury, right? Everything else since they started this negotiation has only strengthened his leverage. From, when I go down, the entire thing falls to pieces, to I've been playing better because you gave me some good weapons to work with. Like, everything has worked in his favor except that injury. So if Dallas was looking at this and saying, we think that Dak Prescott is a good, not great quarterback, and we're only willing to go so far in terms of money, particularly when we've already handed Zeke Elliott a $90 million contract, we don't want to go further than that. If they had that line in the sand, it's gotten worse, because that line in the sand is closer to, or they've gone past it already. Like, they're not clawing that back. So one of two things needs to happen. Either they need to stay firm, in which case he's gone, or they have to, rub out the line in the sand and move another one.
Yeah, I think the Cowboys have seen what they need to see, that he needs to be their guy going forward. I think it's easy enough to look at the whole body of work with Dak and say, look, he's got 2 top 10 finishes and 2 closer to 20. I've used that statement before. I think the other viewpoint, too, is 2018, 74 grade, up to 80 in 2019, 85 in 2020 before getting hurt, was on pace for his best season. And yeah, he was throwing for 400 yards, three of his 4 games or whatever it was. And that's not why he was good, but they were running that offense through him and scoring a lot of points. I think good things were going to happen in Dallas if Dak had stayed healthy there. So I do expect him back. I think Phillip Rivers, we put him at number 10 for free agent because of the value of quarterbacks. And Rivers, the number 17 graded quarterback prior to this weekend's game, played a great playoff game in a losing effort. And you hear his post-game speech too. Like, he is passionate, man. He was really upset that this team that he just had a year with, bonded with, thought they were going to make a run. I could see teams, Patriots fans were like, hey, is he going to be our guy next year? Broncos fans might be looking at it. Like, there are teams that have a good roster, give him another 1-year contract.
You need to be a team like the Colts from this past year, right? A team that genuinely thinks that this is a roster that should be in the postseason, and given the current guy at quarterback, won't be. So a team like Indianapolis still fits that bill. It sounds like they might be leaning towards moving on, but maybe, I don't know if the Patriots fit that, but the Broncos really do. Like, the Broncos, if they're in this position of saying, hey, look, we just surrounded Drew Lock with this insane amount of talent and Drew Lock shit the bed. Like, okay, this is the Brissett thing all over again, right? We've given this guy a really good environment and it's not happened. So let's throw in a Phillip Rivers and see if we can make the postseason right now. And by the way, we don't necessarily need to give up on Drew Lock in doing so. We can sit in behind Phillip Rivers and let him learn and develop and be a mentor to young Drew and see if he can get better over the next year. And then we can kick him to the curb and move on.
That's the thing about the NFL right now. There was a point where you used to hate all the backup quarterbacks that always got jobs. But there was a point where,
some of them were ridiculous.
Like Matt Castle would always have a job. And
Chad Henne is still employed.
Chad Henne would have a job. The backups in the NFL, and this includes some of the free agents here, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Jameis Winston, Cam Newton, and Andy Dalton. They're all free. Tyrod Taylor. They're all free agents. And I think if you said, and you took all the people in the world and you said, are these guys one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the world? I think they're all in the conversation, right? They're all one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the world, at least the best top 40. They're all starting caliber players. And I think, maybe Ryan Fitzpatrick gets one of these Phillip Rivers types of jobs. Like, man, you really balled out the last 3 years, Fitz. take our team that has good talent and see if we can be that bridge quarterback for another team for another year. But I don't know if Jameis Winston's going to get a starting job. I don't know if Cam Newton's going to get a starting job after what we saw this year. Maybe he will. Maybe he'll go to Washington and reunite with Ron Rivera. I don't think Andy Dalton's getting a starting job or Tyrod Taylor. So I think we're in a situation where the backup talent around the NFL, though, is outstanding. And one of these teams is going to grab a backup and be in a really good situation as far as QB 1 and 2.
Yeah, I mean, rarely does a top-end quarterback hit the open market. Dak Prescott would be the only one if he does. And outside of that, if you need a quarterback and a starter and you're not in a position for a Trevor Lawrence or a Justin Fields or a Zach Wilson at the top of the draft, you are in this spot of saying, do we think a bridge like Rivers, Fitzpatrick, Winston, do we think one of those guys actually moves the needle in terms of what we currently have and our options? And there's a lot of, like, those guys would upgrade a lot of quarterback rooms, but they wouldn't necessarily make a giant leap forward in the starter that you have unless you're, the Broncos.
Just to round out the offensive discussion, if you're looking for an offensive lineman, we only have 13 offensive linemen in the top 100. I mean, it's a decent number, but the high end, the guys that actually make the top 20, Trent Williams, stud offensive tackle, Taylor Moton, really good offensive tackle. They make the top 20, and then 2 guards, Brandon Scherf and Joe Thuney. So there's some depth. There's creep back toward average type of tackles that we love. Russell Okung, Alejandro Villanueva, Darrell Williams, who's been outstanding for the Bills this year as that, average to above average tackle. Kelvin Beachum with an injury history, but, again, he's a pretty good pass blocker. So there's guys that can help your offensive line creep back toward average, but as far as impact players, only 4 offensive linemen make our top 20 right now. So
yeah, and don't forget Corey Linsley, who was the best center in the NFL this season by a distance, is also free agent.
Yeah, and tight end doesn't look that great outside of Hunter Henry either. Again, you've got complementary is the key word here, and I think that's free agency this year. Complementary weapons like Gerald Everett at tight end. Gronk is technically a free agent, but he's going back to the Bucs. So.
Yeah, you're just going to ignore running back completely. That's how it works? Running backs don't matter, so we're not even going to mention them.
Yeah, they actually did slip my mind subconsciously, but they did. All right, talk about free agent running backs.
Aaron Jones is the prize, I think. A genuinely elite running back, guy that's good at everything, good in the pass game, which is obviously important. Chris Carson has been a better running back than his reputation for a number of years. Kenyon Drake has been a disappointment this year, given where I think people thought he would be coming into the year. But when you look at those things that quantify expected yards for a running back, given the situations they were put in, like, he's buried. I mean, he didn't. It was the exact opposite of what we thought, which was this was a great environment for Kenyon Drake to look good. And it turned out it was a terrible environment for him this year, and consequently he looked not great. But he still got some talent. And then you get into, iffy. James Conner, Mike Davis.
James Conner's White. run hard. Mike Davis, I think, is a good backup because he's going to force missed tackles when he gets out there. And James White will be he'll be a third down back for somebody. Maybe end up reuniting with Brady in Tampa for next year because they do need a pass game running back. Le'Veon Bell, also an impact running back. He's at number 86 on our rankings. Just for perspective, Aaron Jones, number 44 on our free agent list. He's the top running back on our list. Maybe we're even being too generous.
Stop it.
For running backs. We love running backs. We love you guys.